The thunder cracked like a whip across the dusty plains of Montana Territory as Naomi Jenkins clutched her 6-month-old daughter to her chest, desperately trying to quiet the infant's whimpers. The covered wagon, abandoned at the side of the trail, had seemed like Providence when the storm hit. Now it felt like a trap. 3 days a widow, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her precious Adelaide, Naomi had been running since that terrible night when Jeb's gambling debts had caught up with them. The year was 1876, and the wilderness of the American frontier offered both freedom and peril in equal measure. Naomi pulled the threadbare blanket closer around Adelaide, her heart pounding against her ribs as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. She pressed herself against the far corner of the wagon, behind crates that smelled of tobacco and dried beans. Adelaide, sensing her mother's fear, began to fuss again. "Hush now, sweet girl," Naomi whispered, her lips against her daughter's downy head. "Please, please be still." The hoofbeats slowed, and Naomi held her breath. The storm had worsened, rain pounding the canvas of the wagon cover like angry fists. Perhaps the rider would simply pass by, seeking shelter elsewhere. Her hopes dissolved as the wagon creaked, someone climbing aboard the driver's seat. She clutched Adelaide tighter. "Hello." The voice was deep, cautious. "Is someone in here?" Naomi remained frozen, but Adelaide chose that moment to let out a sharp cry. There was a rustling, and the canvas flap at the back of the wagon was pulled aside. Rainwater dripped from the brim of a wide cowboy hat, obscuring the stranger's face. Naomi shrank back, wishing she could melt into the wood behind her. The man climbed into the wagon with surprising grace for his tall frame. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer sky. His expression softened when he saw her cowering with the baby. "Madam," he said gently, making no move to come closer. "You're safe now." Victor Rhodes had been riding for 3 days straight, tracking a band of cattle rustlers who'd hit the Double R ranch where he worked as foreman. The storm had caught him by surprise, and he'd nearly missed the abandoned wagon. Now, faced with a terrified woman and her infant, the rustlers were the furthest thing from his mind. "I won't hurt you," he said, keeping his distance. Water dripped from his slicker onto the wagon floor. "The storm's getting worse. I was just looking for shelter." Naomi watched him with wary eyes, her arms still protective around Adelaide. "This isn't my wagon," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the rain. I just needed a place to hide." Victor nodded slowly, his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance, the once fine dress now muddy and torn, the haunted look in her eyes. "Looks like we both need shelter tonight," he said. "My name's Victor Rhodes. I work at the Double R about 15 miles east of here." "Naomi," she replied, hesitating before adding, "Naomi Jenkins, and this is Adelaide." Victor smiled at the baby, who had calmed and was watching the stranger with curious eyes. "Pleased to meet you both, Mrs. Jenkins." "It's just Miss now," Naomi said, her voice catching. "My husband." "He's gone." Understanding crossed Victor's face. He removed his wet slicker and hung it from one of the wagon hoops. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said simply, without prying. The baby began to fuss again, and Naomi bounced her gently, a flash of worry crossing her face. "She must be hungry," Victor observed. "I've got some provisions in my saddlebag, nothing fancy, but there's jerky and hardtack. And I can make a small fire outside under the wagon if you need to warm something for the little one." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition, madam. No one should be alone in weather like this." Despite her wariness, Naomi felt the first stirrings of relief. She hadn't eaten since the previous day, saving what little food she had for Adelaide's milk. Victor moved slowly, telegraphing his movements as he retrieved his saddlebags from his horse, which he'd tethered to the wagon. He built a small, sheltered fire beneath the wagon, protected from the rain, and heated water in a tin cup. The smell of coffee soon filled the small space. "It's not much," he apologized, offering her a piece of jerky and a biscuit from his provisions. "It's more than we had," Naomi replied honestly, accepting the food with gratitude. As the night deepened and the storm raged on, Victor kept a respectful distance, sitting near the back of the wagon while Naomi and Adelaide occupied the front. He spoke little, but his presence was oddly comforting. For the first time since Jeb's death, Naomi felt the crushing weight of solitude lift slightly. "Where are you headed?" Victor asked eventually, his voice low and non-threatening. Naomi hesitated. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I was thinking maybe Oregon." "I have a cousin there, or at least I did 10 years ago," Victor nodded thoughtfully. "That's a long journey for a woman alone with a child." "I don't have many options," Naomi said, a hint of steel entering her voice. "There are people looking for us, people Jeb owed money to, bad people." "The worst kind." Victor didn't press further, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You should get some rest, madam. I'll keep watch." Naomi wanted to protest, to maintain her vigilance, but exhaustion tugged at her like an undertow. Adelaide was already sleeping soundly, her tiny hands curled into fists. Naomi positioned herself so that the baby was safely between her and the wagon's side, away from Victor. "Thank you," she whispered. Victor tipped his hat in acknowledgement and moved to sit at the wagon's opening, his rifle across his knees, a silent sentinel against the storm and whatever else might lurk in the darkness. When Naomi awoke, sunlight was streaming through the canvas cover. Adelaide was still asleep beside her, but Victor was gone. Panic flared briefly until she heard the sound of movement outside. She peered cautiously through the wagon flap to see Victor tending a small fire, a pot of something bubbling over it. "Morning," he greeted her, his voice still carrying that same gentle tone from the night before. "Hope you don't mind, but I've made some oatmeal, not as good as my mother used to make, but it's hot." Naomi climbed down from the wagon carefully, Adelaide balanced on her hip. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world that sparkled in the morning light. "That's very kind of you," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She must look a fright after days on the run. "It's nothing fancy," Victor replied, offering her a tin bowl of the simple porridge. "But it'll keep you going." As they ate in companionable silence, Naomi studied Victor more closely. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s to her 25 years. His face was tanned and lined from years under the sun, but his eyes were kind. There was an air of quiet competence about him that she found reassuring. "Mrs. Jenkins, please call me Naomi." Victor nodded. "Naomi, then. I don't mean to pry, but those people looking for you. Are they the ones who?" He left the question unfinished. Naomi stared into her bowl. "Jeb was a good man in his way," she said softly, "but he had vices, gambling mainly. He owed money to some men in town, rough men. They came to collect, and things escalated." She swallowed hard. "Adelaide was in her cradle in the next room. They didn't see her, and I managed to slip out with her while they were." She couldn't finish the sentence. Victor's expression hardened. "These men, they're still looking for you." "I heard them say something about the woman and whatever she's carrying. I think they believe Jeb had something valuable hidden away." She gave a bitter laugh. "As if he would have been borrowing money if he had anything of worth." Victor was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The Double R isn't far from here," he said finally. "The owner, Mr. Richardson, is a fair man. He might have worked for you, and it would be a safe place, at least temporarily." Hope and suspicion warred within Naomi. "Why would you help us? You don't even know me." Victor's gaze returned to her, steady and clear. "My sister was widowed young," he said simply. "With 2 small children, no one helped her when she needed it most. I swore I'd never pass by someone in need, especially a woman and child." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Naomi looked down at Adelaide, who was contentedly playing with a button on her dress. What choice did she have? She couldn't keep running forever, not with a baby. "All right," she said finally. "We'll go to the Double R." Victor nodded, relief evident in his posture. "We should get moving soon. I'll help you get settled in the wagon." Within the hour, they had packed up camp. Victor insisted Naomi and Adelaide ride in the relative comfort of the wagon while he rode alongside on his horse, a sturdy buckskin named Buck. As they traveled, Victor pointed out landmarks, naming ridges and creeks with the familiarity of a man who knew the land intimately. "How long have you been at the Double R?" Naomi asked, genuinely curious. "Going on 15 years now," Victor replied. "Came west from Pennsylvania after the war between the states, started as a ranch hand and worked my way up to foreman. You never wanted your own spread." Victor smiled slightly. "Someday, maybe. For now, I'm content where I am. The Richardsons are good people, they treat their hands fair." The journey took most of the day, with stops to rest the horse and feed Adelaide. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and Victor gestured toward a valley below. "There it is, the Double R." The ranch spread out beneath them, a cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of distant mountains. Fields of grazing cattle dotted the landscape, and a creek wound like a silver ribbon through the property. "It's beautiful," Naomi breathed, surprised by the emotion that welled up at the sight of such peacefulness. As they approached the main house, a stately two-story structure with a wide front porch, an older woman emerged, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "Victor Rhodes, where in tarnation have you been?" she called, though her tone held more relief than anger. "Robert's been worried sick." "Sorry for the delay, Mrs. Richardson," Victor called back, dismounting. "Got caught in the storm and found some folks who needed help." Martha Richardson's expression softened as she noticed Naomi and Adelaide in the wagon. "Well, bring them in, for goodness sake. That baby looks like she could use a proper meal, and so could her mama." Naomi found herself enveloped in the older woman's brisk hospitality, ushered into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and roasting chicken. Martha Richardson was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Victor tells me you've had a rough go of it, dear," she said, setting a cup of hot tea in front of Naomi. "No need to explain anything tonight. You and the little one get some food and rest. Tomorrow's soon enough for talking." Naomi nearly wept at the simple kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. I don't know how to repay." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "And it's Martha, please. Now let me see this little angel." Adelaide, who had been remarkably good-natured throughout the journey, giggled as Martha cooed at her, tiny hands reaching for the older woman's spectacles. "She's a charmer, this one," Martha said approvingly. "What's her name?" "Adelaide, a fine name for a fine girl." "Now, Victor, make yourself useful and show Naomi to the guest room after supper. Robert will want to see you in his study." Victor nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched Martha fuss over Adelaide. "Yes, madam." Supper was a simple but hearty affair, with Robert Richardson joining them, a tall, distinguished man with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He asked no prying questions, instead engaging Naomi in general conversation about the weather and local happenings, as if she were an expected guest rather than a desperate stranger. After the meal, true to Martha's instructions, Victor showed Naomi to a small but comfortable bedroom at the end of the hall. "The washroom is just across the way," he explained, setting down the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to bring with her. "Martha's put a cradle in here for Adelaide." Naomi turned to him, overwhelmed by the day's events. "Mr. Rhodes, I don't know how to thank you." "It's Victor, please," he said. "And there's no thanks needed. Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." As he turned to leave, Naomi called after him softly. "Victor," he paused, looking back. "Thank you for finding us, for saying we were safe." A gentle smile touched his lips. "You are safe here, Naomi, I promise." As the door closed behind him, Naomi sank onto the edge of the bed, Adelaide already asleep in the borrowed cradle. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly breathe, to feel the enormity of all that had happened. Tears came then, silent and cleansing, washing away some of the fear that had been her constant companion. The next morning brought sunshine streaming through lace curtains, and the distant sounds of a ranch coming to life. Naomi dressed Adelaide in the cleanest of their meager clothes and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. Martha was alone in the kitchen, kneading dough with practiced hands. "Good morning, dear," she greeted. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," Naomi admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Sit, eat," Martha instructed, nodding toward a plate of eggs and bacon keeping warm on the stove. "The men have already eaten and gone out. Robert wanted to talk to you, but I told him it could wait until after breakfast." Naomi settled Adelaide on her lap and gratefully accepted the food. What did Victor tell you about me?" Martha wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from Naomi. "Enough to know you're in trouble, but not running from the law." "Victor's a good judge of character, has been since he was a boy. You've known him a long time, since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Martha confirmed. "His father worked our ranch in Pennsylvania before we moved west. Victor came with us after the war." She studied Naomi thoughtfully. "He said you're a widow with men after you because of your husband's debts." Naomi nodded, focusing on feeding Adelaide small pieces of egg. "They killed him. I think they would have killed us too if they'd found us." Martha's expression hardened. "Well, they won't find you here. The double R takes care of its own." She patted Naomi's hand reassuringly. "Now finish your breakfast and we'll go see Robert. He might have some work for you if you're interested in staying a while." Robert Richardson's study was a warm, book-lined room that smelled pleasantly of pipe tobacco and leather. The ranch owner listened attentively as Naomi told her story, his expression grave. "These men," he said when she'd finished, "would they follow you this far?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "They seemed determined. Jeb owed them a lot of money." Robert exchanged a look with Martha, something unspoken passing between them. "Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need to, Mrs. Jenkins. In fact, Martha was just saying yesterday how she could use some help around the house. Our last housekeeper left to get married 3 months ago and we haven't found a suitable replacement." "I'd be happy to help," Naomi said quickly. "I'm a good cook and I can sew and clean. Adelaide is a good baby, she won't be any trouble." "I'm sure she won't," Robert smiled. "It'll be nice to have a little one around the place again. Our children are all grown and gone. 3 boys and a girl," Martha elaborated, "all back east now with families of their own." "Then it's settled," Robert declared. "You'll stay on as our housekeeper, with room and board for you and little Adelaide, plus wages we can discuss later. Victor mentioned you were thinking of heading to Oregon eventually." "My cousin lives there," Naomi said. "At least, she did the last I heard from her." "Well, there's no rush to decide," Martha said firmly. "You can stay as long as you like. The stage goes through town every 2 weeks if you decide to move on." The relief was so profound that Naomi felt lightheaded. "Thank you both. I don't know what would have happened if Victor hadn't found us." "That boy always did have a knack for being in the right place at the right time," Martha said fondly. Over the next few weeks, Naomi settled into life at the Double R. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and Martha was a patient teacher when it came to the specific ways she liked things done. Adelaide thrived in the nurturing environment, cooed over by the ranch hands and spoiled with wooden toys that Robert whittled in the evenings. Victor remained a steady, reassuring presence. Though his duties as foreman kept him busy, he always found time to check on Naomi and Adelaide, bringing small gifts: a wildflower for Naomi, a carved horse for Adelaide. His quiet attentiveness stirred feelings in Naomi that she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after Jeb's death. "He watches you, you know," Martha observed one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. Adelaide was asleep inside and the men were gathered around the bunkhouse, the faint sounds of a harmonica drifting across the yard. Naomi felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure he's just being kind," Martha snorted softly. "Victor Rhodes has been on this ranch for 15 years and never given a second glance to any of the eligible young ladies in town. But he looks at you like a man seeing sunshine after a long winter." I'm a widow with a baby and trouble following behind me, Naomi said quietly. Hardly a catch. HMPH, Martha replied. That boy knows value when he sees it, and you're healing, Naomi. It's all right to live again. Later that night, unable to sleep, Naomi slipped outside to sit on the porch swing. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the footsteps until Victor was already on the steps. Can't sleep? He asked softly. She shook her head, making room for him on the swing. Too many thoughts. He sat beside her, careful to leave a respectful distance between them. For a while, they simply swung in companionable silence, the creaking of the chains a soothing counterpoint to the chorus of night insects. I've been thinking about writing to my cousin in Oregon, Naomi said finally, to see if she's still there, if she might have room for Adelaide and me. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you want, to go to Oregon? I don't know what I want, Naomi admitted. For so long it was just about surviving, getting through each day. Now you have choices, Victor finished for her. Yes. She turned to look at him in the moonlight, his profile strong and steady. What would you do in my position? Victor considered her question carefully. I'd go where I felt safe, where I could build something lasting for myself and my child. He paused, but I hope that place might be here. The simple honesty in his voice made Naomi's heart flutter. Victor, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving, but I want you to know that I care for you, Naomi, for both you and Adelaide. And if you decide to stay, I'd like the chance to show you what kind of life we might build together. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes. I care for you too, she whispered. More than I expected to, but I'm afraid those men are still out there. Victor's hand found hers in the darkness, warm and calloused. We'll face that together if it comes. But Naomi, this is a big country. They may never find you here. She wanted desperately to believe him, to lean into the comfort and strength he offered. But fear had been her companion for too long to be easily dismissed. I need time, she said finally. Time is something we have plenty of, Victor replied, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. The summer days stretched long and golden, filled with the rhythms of ranch life. Naomi found unexpected joy in simple moments. Adelaide's first attempts to crawl. The satisfaction of a well-cooked meal that brought the ranch hands crowding around the table with appreciative comments. The quiet evenings on the porch when Victor would sometimes read aloud from one of Robert's books, his deep voice bringing the stories to life. It was on one such evening, nearly 2 months after her arrival at the Double R, that the peace was shattered. Victor had just finished reading a chapter of Ivanhoe when the sound of approaching horses made them all look up. Robert frowned, setting aside his pipe. We're not expecting anyone, he said, rising to his feet. Victor was already moving, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. Stay inside, he instructed Naomi, his voice suddenly hard. Take Adelaide and go upstairs. The fear that had been dormant for weeks roared back to life. Naomi scooped up Adelaide from her blanket on the porch and hurried inside, her heart pounding. From the upstairs window, she watched as 3 riders approached the house, their figures backlit by the setting sun. Martha appeared at her side, a shotgun in her capable hands. Stay away from the window, she instructed, her voice low but firm. It's them, Naomi whispered, recognizing one of the men even at a distance. The ones who killed Jeb. They won't take you, Martha said grimly, checking the shotgun's chambers. Robert and Victor won't allow it, and neither will I. Downstairs, they could hear the murmur of voices, then Robert's raised in anger. There was the sound of a scuffle, followed by a single gunshot that made Naomi flinch. Adelaide began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. The next few moments were a blur of confusion and terror. The sound of more gunfire, shouts from the direction of the bunkhouse as the ranch hands responded to the commotion. Martha positioned herself at the bedroom door, the shotgun ready. If anyone but Robert or Victor comes through that door, I'll shoot, she said calmly. Minutes stretched like hours. Adelaide's cries had subsided to whimpers, and Naomi held her close, whispering reassurances she didn't feel. Finally, footsteps on the stairs and Victor's voice calling, "Naomi." "Martha, it's over." Martha lowered the shotgun as Victor appeared in the doorway. There was a cut above his eye, blood trickling down his cheek, but he was standing alive. "They're gone," he said simply. "Two ran off, one won't be troubling anyone again." Naomi sagged with relief, then froze. "But the others, they'll come back with more men." "No," Victor shook his head. "They won't. Sheriff Peters is downstairs. They were wanted men, Naomi. Not just for what they did to your husband, but for robberies across 3 territories. The law's been after them for months. They came here looking for me. They stopped in town, asking questions. Word got back to the sheriff, and he remembered the description from the wanted posters. He was on his way here to warn us when they showed up." Victor took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "It's really over, Naomi. You're safe now, truly safe." The reality of it was almost too much to comprehend. Naomi looked down at Adelaide, peacefully playing with the buttons on her dress, blissfully unaware of how close danger had come. "I need to talk to the sheriff," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Of course," Victor replied. "He'd like your statement anyway." Sheriff Peters was a grizzled man with kind eyes who listened attentively as Naomi recounted the night of Jeb's murder and her subsequent flight. He took notes in a small book, nodding occasionally. "You did right to run, Mrs. Jenkins," he said when she'd finished. "These men were dangerous. We've been tracking them since a bank robbery in Denver last year. Your husband likely got caught up in one of their schemes. They were known to use gambling to identify potential victims." "So it's really over?" Naomi asked, hardly daring to believe it. "The 2 that escaped won't get far," Sheriff Peters assured her. "We've got men watching the trails and telegraphs sent to neighboring counties, but even if they did, they'd be fools to come back here." He nodded respectfully to Victor, who stood silently by the door. "From what I saw, they got more than they bargained for tonight." After the sheriff left, the house gradually settled back to normal. Robert had taken a bullet graze to the arm, but Martha had cleaned and bandaged it with brisk efficiency. The ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Adelaide was finally put to bed, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Naomi found Victor on the porch staring out at the now quiet night. She sat beside him, noticing the bandage Martha had applied to the cut above his eye. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "I've had worse," he replied with a small smile. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Naomi said, surprised to find it was true. "I feel lighter, like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot what it was like without it." Victor turned to face her fully. "You don't need to decide anything right now. About Oregon, I mean. Take all the time you need." Naomi's hand found his, her fingers twining with his strong ones. "I don't need more time," she said. "I know where I belong, where we belong." She took a deep breath. "If your offer still stands." The hope that bloomed in Victor's eyes was like sunrise. "It does," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "It always will." "Then we'll stay," Naomi said simply. "Adelaide and I will build that life you talked about together." Victor's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. Naomi's answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them. His kiss was tender, unhurried, a promise of all the days to come. When they finally parted, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I've waited a lifetime to find you," he murmured. "And I rode halfway across the territory running from something, only to find I was running toward you all along," Naomi replied. The Montana night wrapped around them like a blanket. Stars bearing witness to the beginning of their story, a story that would continue for years to come, through joy and sorrow, through the building of their own ranch alongside the Double R, through the birth of 2 more children to join Adelaide, through all the rich tapestry of a life built on that chance encounter in a storm. Years later, Naomi would tell their grandchildren the story of how their grandfather found her hiding in a wagon with their mother, and how his whispered words, "You're safe now," had not just been a moment of comfort, but a promise kept for a lifetime.